The conception of men in the world is
Okay.
they want power over everything and control and money. They just want to rule over everything.
Right.
Why is that the common conception, and why do men want to? Why is that such a huge drive for men
Yeah.
to do those things?
Well, and again, I think it goes back to we talked about just the fall earlier. Like before the fall, men were actually, and women both, but were charged with ruling creation, right? So we were, as we were put in charge of ruling creation, of having that power. But power's not always bad, right? Like power can be used for good, it can be used for evil. And so, before the fall, power was good. The power of caring for creation was good. And then the fall happens, and now everything got turned upside down. And we read this, I think in the last episode, the episode before that one, where in Genesis 3, it says that a woman will be, she will have, her desire will be for her husband, yet he will rule over her. And so there's already that. From point one, it's like, no, but men now, because of sin, the power that they had to exert over ruling and over, ruling, controlling creation, that now is bent. And so now it's not perfect power. It's not pure power. And it can be used for evil. It can be used for selfish gain. And that's what's happened. That's where you literally trace it back to. Because, even there in Genesis 3, the Lord's like, well, sin's happened. And unfortunately now man is going to want to rule over you. And to be honest, not just rule over women, they even want to rule over each other, right?
Right.
And so it's a constant, like a power grab of what kind of small kingdom can I build for myself that I can rule over and exert power over. And not obviously every man does that, but there's a lot that do. And that's kind of their world, is kind of to build their own little kingdom that they have rule over.
So do you think it's possible for anyone to be good with power? Any man?
Yes.
Okay.
But I do think that doesn't happen in a vacuum. In other words, that I think unchecked power is, one of the things that leads to abuses. So I do think anytime a man, to be honest with you, is left with kind of unchecked power, they tend to use that power for their own gain.
Okay.
And so, but no, I think there are lots of people who use power for good, and who use their status, whether it be in society, in their business world, for good. Okay. And so I don't think everyone is using their power for bad or selfish gain all the time.
Well, that's the common conception. So why do you think that's the female perspective on men in some lots of cases?
Because I think it is.
Okay.
I do think that's the reality in lots of cases.
Okay.
And so that's what I'm saying. I think ever since the fall, like you read through the biblical narrative, even like our own patriarchs in the faith weren't all great human beings.
Okay.
And so, you look at...
Did they abuse their power?
Yeah, they abused their own power.
Example.
King David.
Oh, that's a good example.
It's probably the most well-known example. The reason it popped in my head is we actually had this conversation about King David last night at church. That's the reason it popped in my head. But, and his... Most often we talk about King David, and we talk about the fact that he committed adultery with Bathsheba. He had her husband murdered, right? Those are the things that he lied to cover it up. Like those are what we talk about. But the story actually begins where it says that in the time of the year where kings go out to make war, King David stayed home.
It's a time of the year.
Yeah, it's a time where
war season's coming up,
right? And men just and
start hitting the gym.
And nations would battle in war, but David decided he didn't need to go. He could send people in his place. Israel was an incredibly powerful nation. He didn't feel the need to do that. So he actually, in his own power, didn't do the very thing he should have done with character to begin with, to go out with his people, with his troops, as was the custom of all the nations around him.
Okay, so if if King David,
right,
who is man after God's own heart,
yes,
if his moment of weakness is sending some woman's husband out to war, making sure that he gets murdered, and then taking her, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, he did.
If that's a moment of weakness for the best guy ever,
right,
then how are women supposed to deal with any man ever?
Right, because we're all just going to be the scum of the earth.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that
if my whoopsie in dealing with my wife is, oh yeah, I killed this guy and you know what I mean?
Yeah, but it wasn't like
how does my wife deal with that forever?
Right.
Like, oh, sorry, had my David moment.
No, I mean,
love you.
Yeah. No, I mean, I get it, but it's not like that was for David, that wasn't like a one moment thing. Like the lengths that he had to go to cover everything up.
Right.
All right. It extended on for a while.
Well, if I ever did that, I'd try to cover it up a little bit.
Right.
Probably wouldn't work.
The same way it didn't work for David. And, and eventually, he was confronted by a prophet from the Lord.
But I'm just saying, like if that's
yeah, like in other words, if a man after God's own heart did that, what chance does anyone else have?
Right.
I mean, I think it's kind of what you're going to.
And how do women deal with men ever if that's the
case?
If that's the best that they're going to get.
Right. Right. Thankfully, that's not the best.
Okay.
Right. So, yes, was David's heart toward the Lord overall? Yes. But there's a significant difference between David and you and I today, or any Christian actually today.
Why?
Because Christians have Holy Spirit living in them, God living in them.
Okay.
To empower them not to do the same stupid stuff David did.
Like kill a guy and
like have someone murdered after you've committed adultery. Right. And we have to remember he was using his power in the wrong for all of this, right? He used his power to say, I want to sleep with her. Go get her for me.
Right.
I want to have her husband killed. Do that. Right. And then
why would any woman want any man to have any power? If that's the best
right.
example out there.
Right. Well, but thankfully, I guess what I'm saying, that's not the best example. That's an example. But even Jesus said that John the Baptist was actually the greatest of all men who've been born of a woman. And
so all of them
leading up to, but he said, but yet John will be the least in the kingdom going forward. And so, in other words, John was like, for Jesus, John was like
the Baptist one.
Yes, John the Baptist, yes. The one who baptized Jesus in the River Jordan, those kind of things, and prepared the way for Jesus' coming. So for Jesus, John was like the man. Okay.
Okay.
And so we know John lived a faithful life unto the Lord. And so in his position, talking about power, when people asked him, are you the Messiah? He said, no, I'm not the Messiah. I'm not even worthy to untie the Messiah's sandals, right? I'm not even worthy to do that.
It's a weird,
he must
thing.
increase, I must decrease. That's the opposite of the power that we're talking about, that so often are found in men and women in today's society, where rarely, or I'll say rarely, maybe it is rarely, I don't know. Rarely do we find someone whose kind of life mission and their goal in life is, I want to decrease so Jesus can increase in my life. I want to be less than so he can be more. And that was John's whole perspective. So a person like that, I think, could be trusted with power.
Well, it's a lot easier when he's standing right there turning water into wine. And
yeah.
Oh, I got nothing on this guy.
Right.
I'll see you.
Yeah. But shouldn't that be our attitude today if we know that's what he did? as men
sure.
who are following Jesus.
Yeah.
It should be the same attitude. Like the same attitude that Christ had, as Paul says in Philippians 2, should be in us. The attitude that says, even though, and this is kind of going back to again, we're talking about power. I mean, Christ had all the power, right? He was all powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And yet
unlimited power.
And yet it says in Philippians 2 that Christ, though he had, equality with God was a thing to be grasped because he was equal with God.
Mm-hmm.
He chose to come in the form of a man. So in other words, he chose to actually relinquish power, to go from being all powerful to being limited in power, to come be born as a man. And so Christ was willing to lay down power. And that's what John the Baptist is even doing. He's laying down power. He could have built a massive gathering for himself. But when it was clear that Jesus was the Messiah, John was sending his own disciples to go follow the Messiah and to become his disciples.
Mm.
And so...
Wait, other people could have disciples in the Bible?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, Jesus wasn't the only one who had disciples. Pretty much every rabbi or teacher had disciples.
Oh.
Yeah. And so they were so a disciple is just one who is a follower or a pupil, a learner that would just follow their rabbi, their teacher around. And so, so here's John. He's telling his own disciples, you go follow Jesus. And I think if women could see that there are men that are like that are willing, in other words, to really desire to put Jesus first, and not that they do it perfectly all the time, but that's their desire. And I do think there are plenty of men who are like that. It's for me, as a pastor, it's been one of the joys of my life to be able to be involved in officiating a lot of weddings
mm-hmm.
of men, young men, that I can, and individuals, up into their 40s even, where I can look at and say, these men are trustworthy. These are good men who will not abuse their power, at least not intentionally, that's not like their desires to abuse their power, their control, or, those kind of things. Yes, we all have selfishness to deal with, but it's really awesome when I'm standing there officiating a wedding and I'm looking at this man going, I know he's going to do his best to love his wife like Jesus would love the bride. And I think that has been really encouraging for me.
Okay.
Because, and this goes into another thing too, I think if you see that there are men that are like that, you're more liable to believe that's the case. Right? In other words, if there are role models out there that are acting that way, you're more liable to believe them. That there are men that are like that, And I think for a lot of us, for a lot of men, a lot of women, we don't have a lot of role models that look like that growing up. We don't have a lot of individuals that are men that maybe even they have money or, but they're not abusing it. They're not just in it for
mm-hmm.
themselves. They're able to have a sense of, self-control, because we can have self-control. We don't have to, go, make out or have sex with every individual, that we want to, or that even wants to have sex or make out with us, right? Like we can actually have self-control. And so I think that when you see individuals that live like that, it gives us hope that, man, there are people like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say even personally for me, that was a big deal, coming kind of from my own situation, growing up, not in a Christian household, parents divorced, and even getting into the Christian circle where I wasn't even seeing a lot of Christian men live out their lives as husbands and as fathers in a way that I care to model. It came time for, when I was looking at proposing to my wife, and I went and looked at rings and I freaked out. Absolutely freaked out. And my thought was,
because they were so expensive?
Well, that could have been part of it. But no, actually it was because I was sitting there going, why would I do this when most marriages that I know suck?
Yep.
Like, why would I do this when I know this is going to be crap for the next 40, 50 years of my life? Like, why would I put myself through this? And then
I don't know any good ones.
Yeah, you know any? I'm sorry. And so the Lord began to put,
except mine.
Exactly. And so
And yours.
there you go. Way to throw me in there.
Yeah.
But then I began to look at some men around me who were older, who had been married to the same individual for decades. And I began to see, man, there are some really good, healthy marriages. There are men and women who've been married that genuinely love each other, that genuinely have a great marriage, that are good husbands, that are good fathers. And to be honest with you, that actually is what flipped the switch for me to convince me that, okay, I can go into this marriage thing. And so I think that for a lot of people,
this is a question for later.
Okay. Yeah. But I do think that's a lot. I do think that's for a lot of people, we need to be able to see that. Like if you see it, you know, it's possible.
In the Bible, they used to get married at 13 and then stay married till they were 900.
Well, that's true if you're talking about going all the way back to, pre-Noah.
That's a long time.
That's a long time, brother.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long time to be married. Yep.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I know maybe a long winding answer, but I do think if we have people that are willing, like that we can look up to, that we can say, I want to model my marriage, or I want to model the way they parent, right? Because we see it, we look at them. And then for women, they can look at whether it's, maybe it's not their dad, maybe it's another male in the church, or that's something they work with, or whatever it may be. And they can look at that male and go, man, look at the way he models living a life that is doing his best to serve and love his wife and his kids the way Jesus would.
Okay.
Because you hope that there are people like that out there. Because there are. There are.
Yes.
Yes.
But they also might kill a guy and take his wife too, so be careful out there, ladies. Anywho.
Way to dismantle everything I said in like one sentence.
I guess when you're having to stay married from 13 to 900,
right?
That's a long time to accidentally slip up and murder a guy and have sex with his wife. But yeah.
So what you're basically saying is, but thankfully we're not living till 900 today.
He only did it once, and he's really nice when no one else is around.